United States Army veteran Dr. John Johnson saw his daughter's corpse in a Missouri funeral home in July 2005, the growing sensation that something was off about her death intensified. She was the first woman from Missouri to die in the war in Iraq, but according to the United States Department of Defense, she had not died in battle or by tragic accident, but by suicide with an M16. Interestingly, there was no gunpowder residue found on her hands. John later inquired in an official congressional correspondence, why did we receive her body with dress uniform gloves already glued to her hands? There were other pressing questions too. Dr. John Johnson and his wife Linda had their suspicions, but getting answers would prove to be a difficult task.
We know that the people we're dealing with, they lie as easy as they breathe. We want justice for our daughter. They lie as easy as they breathe.
In this episode of It's a Mystery, we'll be discussing what happened to LaVena Lynn Johnson.
These terrorists did what no politician, no speaker, nothing else, no one else could do, and that is bring Americans together.
You know, it's important to me in this series to provide context for the crimes and mysteries we discuss. So first, we need to explore the climate leading up to the woes of the Johnson family and take it back to 2002. Those of us who are old enough remember how much America was gassing itself as a protector of democracy and virtue and all that jazz.
Across the nation, flags have been flying off the shelves.
I've probably gone to 8 or 9 places. There are no flags.
Walmart sold 200,000 yesterday and put more on order today.
This is probably the most direct way for the common citizen to go show his support.
I knew some people on those planes, and I feel like I have to do something.
We had invaded Afghanistan at the end of 2001, right after the September 11th attacks on American soil, and most citizens were bursting with patriotism and Islamophobia, making the new proposal of war in Iraq a generally popular concept among conservatives and others, even if the Bush administration was lying about the existence of weapons of mass destruction.
At this New Orleans Army recruiting office and others, the young and the brave are preparing to defend the land of the free.
I have confidence that our government will take the necessary action to see that justice is done.
You want to be a part of that?
Yes, sir.
This country has to take care of itself. Nobody else is going to.
That attitude has helped to more than double sales at B&S Guns and other shops since Tuesday's attack.
This gun has no safety at all.
Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld said in 2002, the Iraq war would take 5 days or 5 weeks or 5 months, but it certainly isn't going to last any longer than that. From 2002, plenty of people protested against the war, including 36 million people in 3,000 protests worldwide, but as we know, this was futile, and on March 19, 2003, America invaded Iraq.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
By 2004, the ongoing war was losing popularity, and the death of NFL player and Army specialist Pat Tillman was sparking more criticism and outrage. Tillman, a safety for the Arizona Cardinals, had enlisted to the Army in 2002 to much acclaim. 2 years into his service, he was shot by friendly fire in Afghanistan, which the military lied about.
At the time, military officials said he was killed by insurgents during an ambush. Tillman's family was told he'd charged up a hill, forcing the enemy to withdraw, saving the lives of his fellow Rangers before he was fatally shot.
They reported that he died by enemy fire and promoted him to corporal. Members of his own unit even burned his body armor and uniform in an attempt to hide that he was shot and killed by his own men, which his family didn't find out about until weeks after the fact. High-ranking officials told numerous lies that led to tons of controversy and congressional hearings that further dampened American enthusiasm for war in the Middle East.
I also sent a message informing my chain of command that we believed it was fratricide, and we did that when we were told there were going to be fairly high-profile memorial services.
It was reported in September 2005 that Pat Tillman had become increasingly disillusioned with the war in Iraq, coming to view it as illegal, and that he had planned to meet with notable critic and war hater Noam Chomsky after he returned from his ill-fated tour in Afghanistan. So the war's growing unpopularity, along with no actual recovered weapons of mass destruction, was a bunch of bad publicity. America, having had a volunteer military service since the 70s, suddenly saw itself facing a recruitment slump. The Bush administration had three options: withdraw and concede victory, institute a military draft that would likely ruin Bush's presidency, or bring in contractors. Hired contractors and mercenaries had reputations of being more aggressive and violent than their military peers, and they didn't have to answer to the same rules. During World War II, only about 10% of America's armed forces were contracted, but during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, that proportion grew to 50%. And yes, grew even more during the Obama administration. Contractors and mercenaries were not held to the standards of the military, and as people across the world can attest, those standards are already kind of low. Lastly, there are no international laws or standards that regulate the mercenary industry. In 2004, Hazelwood Central High School senior LaVena Johnson graduated in Florrisant, Missouri, a middle-class suburb right outside of St. Louis. Nicknamed Miss America and Squeaky by her parents, LaVena had been an honor roll student and violin player who eventually wanted to become a filmmaker. Since the age of 12, she had been a vegetarian and even joined PETA as a teen. She was described as socially conscious and was a member of a school group that focused on diversity issues, and she volunteered for American Heart Association walks. In September of 2004, she joined the Army and eventually became a part of the 129th Combat Support Battalion out of Fort Campbell, Kentucky. She was influenced to join by her parents, both of whom had served in their youth. Her father, John, grew up in poverty in the Pruitt-Igoe housing projects before serving 3 years in the Army so he could attend college and get a doctorate in psychology. LaVena made similar goals, joining the Army to, quote, travel and pay for her own college education. Her parents were hesitant to let her join the military, but were impressed and supportive of her decision to pay her own way through school, though it is noted that her mother tried to talk her out of joining. As an Army grunt, her occupation was a unit supply specialist. Her battalion was deployed to Balad, a city of 80,000 about 50 miles away from Baghdad. In addition to American military aggression, the area was the site of ongoing violence between Sunni and Shiite forces. I find it important to mention that 2005 is also the year that the military implemented a new policy towards sexual assault to be investigated solely by the Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Office, established just the year before. To fully understand the gravity of that, keep in mind that independent of the male-on-male assault that is common in the military has officially recognized and accepted women into its ranks since 1948. So before 2005, victims of rape had no investigative office, demonstrating how deeply embedded rape culture is and remains in the military. According to the most recent conservative statistics, 1 in 3 women who join the military will be sexually assaulted or raped. There was the high-profile murder of soldier Tina Priest, who was killed by her rapist in 2006. Or you can think about the 2007 case of Marine Lance Corporal Maria Lauterbach, who reported being raped by her superior and then was murdered and set on fire by him when she was 8 months pregnant. The 2020 murder of Army Specialist Vanessa Guillen in 2020 by another soldier is a testament to the rampant issues in the military, especially at Fort Hood Base in Texas. In 2021, women make up 17% of active military duty. But back to LaVena. On July 17, 2005, Private Johnson spoke on the phone with her mother, Linda, assuring her she would be home for her favorite holiday, Christmas. She told her mother not to start decorating without her. The holiday was a big occasion for the Johnson family, which included LaVena, a younger sister named Lakeisha, and 3 older brothers named John, Jay, and Jermaine. So it was big news that her battalion would be rotated back to the States in time for the holidays. Just 2 days after that, LaVena's death was reported on July 21, 2005 by the St. Louis Post-Dispatch in a very romanticized way. It's clear that someone leaked the story to the press because there shares a photo of LaVena's mother, Linda, being comforted by a cop as she receives the news. What should have been a private moment was turned into a fluff piece on a young middle-class black woman who accidentally lost her life while serving her country. Of course, this narrative only lasted for so long. The article mentioned John Johnson said the Army representative who delivered the news to his family said that her death was a result of self-inflicted injuries, but that it was not suicide. This is the seed of doubt that began the Johnson family skepticism, especially because the Department of Defense didn't update them on LaVena's cause of death for months. In September, it was reported that they still didn't know exactly what happened and that the investigation could take as long as a year. While the Department of Defense publicly maintained that LaVena died of non-combat injuries, John Johnson had been told by a medical examiner she died of suicide. Remember how I said LaVena was found in a tent? Which one? The family was told she was found dead in her barracks, but she was actually found in a contractor's tent. Information they eventually came to know with a little digging. The tent in question was owned by Kellogg Brown & Root, which was at the time a subsidiary of Halliburton. If that name sounds familiar to you, it's because they've been accused repeatedly of sexual assault and abuse, creating shell companies to avoid paying taxes, and they even bribed Nigerian officials to win government contracts. On July 25th, it was reported that LaVena was laid to rest at the Jefferson Barracks National Cemetery. The same article noted, an employee of Austin A. Lane Renaissance Chapel in Jennings, which handled the funeral arrangements, said a wound on the left side of Johnson's head appeared to be a bullet hole. The employee asked not to be identified, so this information was shared early on. The Johnson family launched their own investigation in frustration with the military's Criminal Investigation Division, who had claimed to have spoken to members of LaVena's battalion. They said peers claimed that the soldier was depressed and spoke of killing herself. Dr. Johnson, a trained psychologist who was a former counselor for an Army drug abuse program in which, quote, he was trained to identify suicide risks, disputed that. He also studied the few black and white photos of the crime scene he had obtained. In December 2005, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch did an update on the Johnson family at Christmas time, and Linda bemoaned, "How can I hang stockings when one of my children got murdered this year?" In addition to talking with local news outlets, the Johnsons implored U.S. Representatives William Lacey Clay Jr. and Sue Myrick to make inquiries on their behalf. It would take 2 years before anything happened when LaVena's death was raised at a congressional hearing for the death of Pat Tillman. Letters were sent to Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, and eventually, through the Freedom of Information Act, the Johnson family obtained official colored photographs and heavily redacted documents that further strengthened the belief that LaVena was murdered. In the complaint that Representative Lacey Clay sent on behalf of the Johnsons, it was noted that LaVena, only 8 weeks on the job in Balad, had not been assigned a battle buddy, which is standard military procedure for soldiers so they can keep up with one another for safety purposes. So why was LaVena alone on the night of her death? And why was she found not in her tent, as the military had assured the Johnsons, but rather in a contractor's tent? Additionally, John mentioned that no vaginal swabs were done to test for DNA. John Johnson forced himself to view the bloody crime scene in color numerous times to help understand what happened, which is something no parent should ever have to do. According to the observations of crime scene photos and those heavily censored reports studied by the Johnson family, LaVena had a black eye, chemical burns on her genitals, a broken nose, and some loose teeth. There were teeth marks and scratches on her upper body. Her back and right hand had been set on fire. There was a gunshot on the left side of her head. Keep in mind that she was 5'1" and roughly 100 pounds. Besides the obvious red flags I just listed that point to vicious assault, both physical and sexual, there was no suicide note. To cap it all off, bloody footprints were found outside of her sleeping quarters. The autopsy photos in Johnson's possession have been verified by the St. Louis American, with the paper explaining, nude images taken at autopsy show burns to the right side of the body and lividity on her right side. It confirmed her broken nose and described an official sketch of the crime scene with her cot between her body and where her gun was found. According to the official military autopsy issued 3 days after her death, there were no teeth marks or scratches to her body except for 2 abrasions on her right thumb. It also reported there were no vaginal injuries, but the examiner alleged LaVena had an STD. A second autopsy was performed in St. Louis at the request of Dr. Johnson, and the city's medical examiner didn't disagree with the military's assessment that she died of a gunshot wound to the head, but stopped short of labeling the death a suicide. When LaVena's body was found, she was fully clothed and there was a blood trail that suggested she had been dragged. The debris found on her clothes backed this up. Her fingerprints were never found on the M16 rifle that caused her gunshot wound, which was angled incorrectly for a right-handed person. Johnson and his backers contend that the 5'1" LaVena's arms were too short to make such a wound with such a large weapon. To make things even more suspicious and eerie, the Army initially refused to issue LaVena's autopsy for months, despite their quick assertion that she had committed suicide. Quote, "My daughter was raped, beaten, murdered, set on fire, then they tried to burn the tent down with her body in it," John Johnson recalled. He said, "It's probably involving somebody with some rank and some prestige, and they're covering for them." Retired Army Colonel Ann Wright, an outspoken activist who targeted sexual assault in the military, found this theory plausible, citing abuse of military power as a common occurrence. In June 2008, the House Armed Services Committee said it would look into LaVena's death, but didn't commit to a formal investigation. In 2009, Christopher Gray, a spokesman for the Army's Criminal Investigation Command, found that its work was thorough and complete, and that it would not reopen the case unless new credible information warranting further investigation is brought to our attention. Nothing came of this. And ever since, the Department of Defense has maintained that the 19-year-old killed herself. She was promoted to private first class and buried with military honors at Jefferson Barracks National Cemetery. Her family is still out there struggling with her fate today, and for at least 5 years after her death, they kept her bedroom preserved, but couldn't bear to display photos of her around the house. So 16 years later, what are the theories? According to the crime scene photos and Dr. Jack Johnson, something foul. Either a high-ranking military official or a mercenary outside the bounds of military code raped and murdered the 19-year-old private. Maybe there were accomplices. Whoever did it then probably put some sort of chemical on her genitals to destroy DNA evidence, likely from the aerosol can seen in crime scene pictures of the tent. The Department of Defense, already dealing with falling support for the war in Iraq, either covered up the crime as a suicide or actively decided to not investigate deeply enough so they could continue plausibly denying a murder. So ultimately, the mystery is not exactly what happened to LaVena, because we already know. Her race and gender, along with the ill-fated Hurricane Katrina just a month after her death, meant there was only so much public outrage and press to spare for her. And I believe the Johnson family, and I believe she was brutally murdered. But who did it? What person or persons bit her, scratched her, set her on fire, burned her genitals, and dragged her corpse before shooting it to make it look like a suicide? Unfortunately, thanks to the United States Department of Defense and our grand military complex harboring mercenaries and contract killers, the case of LaVena Lynn Johnson is a mystery.